Hello, this is foodoffensive.com's Fukushima weekly update, and this is going to be episode number 2. Last week I covered the whole plume-gate scandal going on concerning Fukushima, and I have promised to bring you at least one update a week concerning Fukushima. Normally I bring you food updates and things going on in our food supply, talking about the integrity of our food supply and things that we are eating that are not so good for us. And it kind of coincides with Fukushima because obviously it's turning into a worldwide disaster, and it can affect our food supply, it can affect the air we breathe, our water, etc. And not just those in Japan, but everywhere. And so I want to bring an update, and this is going to be every week, and it's not going to be always food specific, but obviously it will tie in with food or health in one way or another. But this week I'm going to cover, actually just show you a rebroadcast from Infowars.com's daily radio broadcast. Mike Adams, the health ranger, sitting in for Alex Jones, and he's interviewing Arnie Gunderson, just talking about the overall cover-up by the mainstream media about things that are not being told, the truth that's not being told, and about Fukushima and other issues going on, and just some insight there. And normally I might be in front of the camera talking, showing you articles. I might just be doing a voiceover with a video like this. But here is this week's Fukushima weekly update.
But the problem with what you just said, or I should say the challenge, is that the mainstream media has already demonstrated it's going to lie about this. So if the average person out there in California, let's say, says, well, I'm going to watch CNN and I'm going to wait for CNN to tell me whether or not there's been a big release of radiation from Fukushima, isn't it possible that CNN may just never cover it? Or they may downplay it, or the U.S. government may come up with some kind of weird cover story. Hasn't the truth already been manipulated so much that we can't really trust the media to tell us the future of what's going on there?
Well, I don't trust the mainstream media. Actually, though, I mean, CNN had me on 20 times, so they've done better than most of the others.
Oh, I wasn't aware of that. That's actually to their credit to have you on then.
Well, thank you. But you're absolutely right. The mainstream media has underplayed the Fukushima disaster, since it began. It's through alternative shows like yours. It's through alternative sites like mine that people are getting the knowledge that experts have. All the things I've been saying for the last year are turning up in FOIA requests from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. They were thinking it. They just weren't telling the public.
Right. You nailed it. The FOIA requests have revealed a lot of interesting information where wasn't one of the documents from the NRC showing that by their calculations, they had already estimated that 18,000 infant deaths had occurred in the USA due to the radiation? Or am I getting that right?
I don't remember seeing that one, but there were so many that were terrifying. They had data from the roof of the embassy in Tokyo in the first week that was terrifying, and yet they never made that information public. We had a businessman in Tokyo who was staying on the same block as the U.S. Embassy take a sample from the roof of his hotel, and it was harder than a pistol. And this was 6 months after the accident. So, we have known that Tokyo was jeopardized at the beginning of this accident since it was happening, and really didn't do much to warn the citizens.
Wow, for those watching PrisonPlanet.tv, they just showed the footage of one of the explosions of one of the reactors. Was that reactor number 2 that was being shown? I don't know. But it looks like a massive explosion. There's been conjecture that perhaps it was a nuclear explosion. I'm not sure. What are your thoughts on that, Arnie?
Yeah, it was a prompt, moderated criticality.
Okay, you're going to have to break that down for us all.
Well, a bomb is a prompt, fast criticality. A nuclear reactor is usually never prompt.
Yeah, unfortunately.
I'll be this could take an hour, but I'll try to knock it out in 30 seconds.
Well, imagine like all the power that would power the city of Tokyo for 10 years being released in 2 seconds is what you're getting at.
Well, that's what a bomb is, right? If your readers want to go, your listeners want to go up and watch this, you can see that we tested this 40 years ago in an experiment called Borax, B-O-R-A-X, just like the 20 mules. The borax experiments look almost exactly like the explosion at Fukushima Unit 3. And those were prompt, moderated criticalities.
Okay, so it's not the same as a detonation of a nuclear warhead, obviously, but it's certainly a much faster release than was planned by the engineers who built the facility. Now, one of the things I really respect about you, Arnie, is that you visited Japan, you took some soil samples, and I believe on your website, fairwinds.com, you even mentioned that in the United States, those soil samples, they are so contaminated with radiation that they would be considered, what was the term you used?
Oh, they'd be considered radioactive waste, and they'd have to be, stored in a controlled facility, yeah.
So that soil, how far out from Fukushima did you sample that soil?
Well, that's the point I was trying to make in the video. Tokyo is, depending on where you are, 150 miles away from the accident, and yet, I mean, these people were gardening in soil that was in the States would be considered radioactive waste. And but I shot the video when I was at a meeting in Washington, D.C. And my point was Tokyo is the capital of Japan. And within 100 miles of Washington are a dozen nuclear reactors. How would we feel if our capital was so contaminated that it should be considered nuclear waste? I think the public reaction would be dramatic. We've got to shut these things down. Whereas because it's happened in the other guy's country, mainstream media has totally ignored it.
But you hit on something really crucial right there. You said that the soils are so contaminated, and that was with cesium-137, correct?
Cesium-137 and 134. That's how you know it came from Fukushima. If it was just cesium-137, it could be bomb, it could be Chernobyl. But when you see 134 and 137 together, that's the signature from Fukushima.
All right, that's because every fuel source in the nuclear industry has a particular elemental signature or fingerprint, you might say, that can identify its source. What's crucial about what you just said also is that if the soils are contaminated, cesium is very close to the mineral action of potassium in plants. So I believe that when plants are grown, when food crops are grown in soil contaminated by cesium, to the extent that those plants would normally uptake potassium, which is a common mineral in many crops, including potatoes, for example, they would uptake that cesium, which would go into the food so that the people who grew their food on that land would then be eating radioactive food.
Yeah, cesium is exactly chemically like potassium. If you remember your high school chemistry, they're right above each other in the periodic chart. But so they're both muscle seekers. And what we find with cesium poisoning is that, especially in kids that are growing, illnesses like something called Chernobyl heart, where the cesium builds up in a muscle that's rapidly growing, like an infant or a fetus's heart, and causes heart damage or heart holes. While the infant may live for the rest of their life after surgery, their life is expectancy is shortened and the quality of life is minimal. So cesium is a muscle seeker. It also produces cancers, obviously, but because it's radioactive. But in addition, it can do damage to muscles, especially in kids that are rapidly growing.
So this is an indiscriminate. Obviously, it can be used as a weapon by terrorists or even false flag attacks, which is another concern of many of the listeners here on the Alex Jones Show. We had a report from Mike Bundrant, who's one of our contributing writers over at Natural News. He was in Tokyo recently, and he discovered that many families are eating this contaminated food because their parents or their other family members are living in a state of denial. They've been told by the Japanese government that this is safe, so they're planting food on this contaminated soil. They're eating this radioactive food, and they are doing so knowing it's radioactive, but they can't go against their other family members because of the very powerful, parental family structure often that you find in Japanese families. And these middle-aged Japanese citizens, they're going to die of cancer from it.
You're absolutely right. It's a cultural problem there, and the government is playing on the cultural problem. There's a ray of hope here because the women of Japan aren't buying it. The men seem to be saying, well, my government told me it's safe, therefore it's safe. Whereas the women, especially the young childbearing age women, are just saying, hell no, we won't glow, I guess is the old term.
That's a good one.
But the women in Japan are a significant majority in all of these marches that you see, which is unheard of for Japan. I mean, the women...
Arnie, sorry to interrupt you. We got to go to a break, but stay with us. I want to ask you on the other side of this break about the 85 times Chernobyl radiation figure that's been floating around. That and much more straight ahead here on the Alex Jones Show. We'll be right back after this break.